Hi folks, I'm Marina Namchu and welcome back to my channel Prep Up with Marina. This is the second part, the second video of the story The Chinese Statue by Jeffrey Archer. Now for those of you who have missed out on the first part, please make sure to watch that video or else this second video will not make sense to you. So now, without wasting any time, let's carry on from where we had left. This is on page 65. The Mandarin had discovered that the little craftsman Yung Li came from the old and trusted family of Yung Shao, who had for some 500 years been craftsmen. So Yung Li's ancestors also had been craftsmen like him. Sir Alexander also learned that many of Yung Li's ancestors had examples of their work in the palaces of the Manchu princes. Yung Li himself was growing old and wished to retire to the hills above the village where his ancestors had always died. His son was ready to take over the workshop from him and continue the family tradition. The minister thanked the Mandarin for his diligence. Diligence means, his effort, for his thorough effort, and had only one more request of him. The Mandarin listened sympathetically to the ambassador from England and returned to the palace to seek advice. A few days later, the Empress granted Sir Alexander's request. Almost a year to the day, the minister, accompanied by the Mandarin, set out again from Peking for the village of Halichua. When Sir Alexander arrived, he immediately dismounted from his horse and entered the workshop that he remembered so well. The old man was seated at his bench, his flat hat slightly askew, a piece of uncarved ivory held lovingly between his fingers. He looked up from his work and shuffled. That is, when you shuffle, you walk without lifting your feet. He shuffled towards the minister, not recognizing his guest immediately, until he could almost touch the foreign giant. The foreign giant is referred to Alexander Heathcote. Then he bowed low. The minister spoke through the Mandarin. I have returned, sir, within the calendar year to repay my debt. There was no need, Your Excellency. My family is honored that the little statue lives in a great embassy and may one day be admired by the people of your own land. The minister could think of no words to form an adequate reply and simply requested that the old man should accompany him on a short journey. So here actually we come to know that Alexander Heathcote, within the calendar year, he was coming back to repay the debt to the craftsman for having gifted him the Chinese statue. So he asks the craftsman to accompany him on a journey. The craftsman agreed without question, and the three men set out on donkeys towards the north. They travelled for over 2 hours up a thin, winding path into the hills behind the craftsman's workshop. And when they reached the village of Marthian, they were met by another Mandarin who bowed low to the minister and requested Sir Alexander and the craftsman to continue their journey with him on foot. So they got down from the donkeys and they set out on foot. They walked in silence to the far side of the village and only stopped when they had reached a hollow in the hill from which there was a magnificent view of the valley all the way down to Halichua. In the hollow stood a newly completed small white house of the most perfect proportions. 2 stone-lined dogs, tongues hanging over their lips, guarded the front entrance. The little old craftsman, who had not spoken since he had left his workshop, remained mystified. Mystified, he was totally confused. He didn't know where he was, brought to. Mystified by the purpose of the journey, he did not know why he had been brought by Sir Alexander Heathcote to this place, until the minister turned to him and offered a small inadequate gift and my feeble attempt to repay you in kind. So here we see that Sir Alexander Heathcote, he was repaying the craftsman for the gift of the Chinese statue by giving him a beautiful house. The craftsman fell to his knees and begged forgiveness of the Mandarin, as he knew it was forbidden for an artisan to accept gifts from a foreigner. All right, so the craftsman, he just fell to his knees because he knew that he could not accept this gift from a foreigner. All right, and the meaning of artisan means a skilled worker. All right, the Mandarin raised the frightened blue figure from the ground, explaining to his countrymen that the Empress herself had sanctioned, she had granted the minister's request. So Alexander Heathcote, here we come to know, had actually requested the Empress as to whether he could gift Yung Li this beautiful house. A smile of joy came over the face of the craftsman, and he slowly walked up to the doorway of the beautiful little house, unable to resist running his hand over the carved lion dogs. The three travelers then spent over an hour admiring the little house before returning in silent mutual happiness back to the workshop in Harley-Chua. The two men thus parted, honor satisfied, and Sir Alexander rode to his embassy that night, content. He was totally satisfied that his actions had met with the approval of the Mandarin as well as Lady Heathcote. So all of them, they were all very happy at what Sir Alexander Heathcote had done. The minister completed his tour of duty in Peking, and the Empress awarded him the Silver Star of China, and a grateful queen added the KCVO to his already long list of decorations. After a few weeks back at the Foreign Office, clearing the China desk, Sir Alexander retired to his native Yorkshire, the only English county whose inhabitants still hope to be born and die in the same place, not unlike the Chinese. All right, so what is a county? It's, it's a land that is ruled by a count or a countess. Sir Alexander spent his final years in the home of his late father with his wife and the little Ming emperor. That is the statue. The statue occupied the center of the mantelpiece in the drawing room for all to see and admire. So it was placed in such a place where, if any of the guests entered the house, they would immediately spot the statue and they would admire it. Being an exact man, being a very precise man, as we had said earlier in my previous video, Sir Alexander wrote a long and detailed will in which he left precise instructions for the disposal of his estate, including what was to happen to the little statue after his death. He bequeathed the Emperor Kung to his first son, requesting that he do the same in order that the statue might always pass to the first son or a daughter if the direct male line faltered. All right. So what did he do? He gifted the statue to his first son, requesting him to carry on this tradition in the family. And if there was no male child in the family, then it could pass on to the daughter. He also made a provision that the statue was never to be disposed of. It was not to be sold off unless the family's honor was at stake. Unless, the honor of the family was at stake. I mean, if they had to save the honor of the family, then only could they, actually do away with the statue, sell it. Sir Alexander Heathcote died at the stroke of midnight on his 70th year. So he died when he was 70 years old. His firstborn, Major James Heathcote, was serving his queen in the Boer War at the time he came into possession of the Ming Emperor. The major was a fighting man, commissioned with the Duke of Wellington's regiment, and although he had little interest in culture, even he could see the family heirloom was no ordinary treasure, so he loaned the statue to the regimental mess at Halifax in order that the emperor could be displayed in the dining room for his brother officers to appreciate. So the son of Sir Alexander Heathcote, who had got hold of, who had been gifted the statue by his father, he realized the importance and the worth of the statue. Since he was a major serving the queen, what he did was he displayed this statue in the dining room in the regimental mess at Halifax, so that the rest of his friends also could admire and see this beautiful statue. When James Heathcote became colonel to the dukes, the emperor stood proudly on the table alongside the trophies won at Waterloo and Sebastopol in the Crimea and Madrid. So when James Heathcote, he got promotion and he became a colonel, then the emperor was removed from the regimental mess at Halifax, and it stood proudly on the table where all the other trophies were won, especially at Waterloo and Sebastopol in the Crimea and Madrid. And there the Ming statue remained until the colonel's retirement to his father's house in Yorkshire, when the emperor returned once again to the drawing room mantelpiece. So it was only after Colonel James Heathcote, he retired, then the statue once again went back to their residence in Yorkshire, back on the mantelpiece. The colonel was not a man to disobey his late father, even in death, and he left clear instructions that the heirloom must always be passed on to the firstborn of the Heathcotes unless the family honor was in jeopardy. Jeopardy means unless it was the family honor was in a very dangerous position. Colonel James Heathcote, MC, did not die a soldier's death. He simply fell asleep one night by the fire, the Yorkshire post on his lap. So, although he was a soldier throughout his life, he did not die on the battlefield. He died in his sleep. The colonel's firstborn, the Reverend Alexander Heathcote, was at the time presiding over a small flock in the parish of Much Haddam in Hertfordshire. So he was, the son of Colonel James Heathcote was Reverend Alexander Heathcote, and he was in charge of a parish. After burying his father with military honors, he placed the little Ming emperor on the mantelpiece of the vicarage where the priest resides. Few members of the Mothers' Union appreciated the masterpiece, but one or two old ladies were heard to remark on its delicate carving. And it was not until the Reverend became the Right Reverend, that means the bishop, he became a bishop, and the little statue found its way into the bishop's palace, that the emperor attracted the admiration he deserved. So, till Reverend Alexander Heathcote was just the parish priest, the few ladies from the Mothers' Union, they used to come, they used to admire. Some of them were found to be remarking about its beautiful, carvings and things like that. But it was only later that when Reverend Alexander Heathcote became the bishop, that the statue got the admiration that it really deserved. Many of those who visited the palace and heard the story of how the bishop's grandfather had acquired the Ming statue were fascinated. They were absolutely fascinated to learn of the disparity between the magnificent statue and its base. They also came to know of the story regarding the base. The base was actually just added on to this piece of art. It always made a good after dinner story, and many families they talked about it, especially after they had finished their dinner. It was a good story to be told. God takes even his own ambassadors, but he did not do so before allowing Bishop Heathcote to complete a will, leaving the statue to his son, with his grandfather's exact instructions carefully repeated. I'm sorry. So, we all know that one day, each one of us, we are mortals and we have to die. So, the bishop also, Bishop Heathcote, before he died, what he did was he very diligently he wrote out a will exactly like how his grandfather Sir Alexander Heathcote had written out regarding the Chinese statue. The bishop's son, Captain James Heathcote, was a serving officer in his grandfather's regiment, so the Ming statue returned to the mess stable in Halifax. Once more it went back. During the emperor's absence, the regimental trophies had been augmented by those struck by Press, the Marne, and Verdun. The regiment was once again at war with Germany, and young Captain James Heathcote was killed on the beaches of Dunkirk and died intestate. Died intestate means he died without having made the will. Made the will before he died. He just died without having made the will. All right. Thereafter, English law, the known wishes of his great-grandfather and common sense prevailed, and the little emperor came into the possession of the captain's 2-year-old son. So, since the family knew about Sir Alexander's will and his wishes, so it was naturally passed down to the captain's 2-year-old son. Alex Heathcote was, alas, not of the mettle of his doughty ancestors, and he grew up feeling no desire to serve anyone other than himself. Now we see here, Alex Heathcote was a very selfish person, all right, and he did not, he did not have that same mettle. That means, he did not have the ability to actually cope with difficulties in life. When Captain James had been so tragically killed, Alexander's mother lavished everything on the boy that her meager income would allow. So, when Alex's father, that is Captain James, when he died very tragically, what happened was the mother, she showered all her love and her concern and care on the little boy, although she was not able to do so because she had very, a little amount of money with her. It didn't help, and it was not entirely young Alex's fault that he grew up to be, in the words of his grandmother, a selfish, spoiled little brat. So since his mother did everything to please her son, what happened to him was he turned out to be a very selfish individual. When Alex left school, only a short time before he would have been expelled. So he was quite notorious because he was about to be expelled from the school as well. He found he could never hold down a job for more than a few weeks. That means he could not hold on to any job. He would work in a particular firm for about a few weeks, and then again he would be shifting to another job. It always seemed necessary for him to spend a little more than he and finally his mother could cope with. So, Alex Heathcote was a spendthrift, and although he did not have the means, he was spending more than he had, the amount or his mother had the amount. They were running short of money, but Alex always seemed to spend more than they had. The good lady, deciding she could take no more of this life, departed it to join all the other Heathcotes, not in Yorkshire but in heaven. So eventually the mother of Alex Heathcote could take this no longer, and then eventually she died. In the swinging 60s, when casinos opened in Britain, young Alex was convinced that he had found the ideal way of earning a living without actually having to do any work. He developed a system for playing roulette with which it was impossible to lose. All right, roulette is a gambling game, all right, in which a ball is dropped into a moving wheel with holes. So he kind of engaged himself in this particular game. He did lose. So he refined the system, and promptly he lost more. So he started gambling more and more, and he lost more and more money. He refined the system once again, which resulted in him having to borrow to cover his losses. Now he was getting into a mess. Why not? If the worst came to the worst, he told himself, he could always dispose of the little Ming emperor. So he said, he always thought that if he was in really dire need of money, then he would definitely sell off the Ming emperor. The worst did come to the worst, as each one of Alex's newly refined systems took him progressively into greater debt until the casinos began to press him for money, for payment. So eventually he was he was deep down in debt. So, and he was in a very tight spot now. When finally, one Monday morning, Alex received an unsolicited call. Unsolicited means uninvited call from two gentlemen who seemed determined to collect some £8,000 he owed their masters, and hinted at bodily harm if the matter was not dealt with within 14 days. So one fine day, two gentlemen appeared at his doorstep, and they threatened him and told him that they would physically harm him if he did not return the money. Alex caved in. He just broke down. After all, his great-great-grandfather's instructions had been exact. The Ming statue was to be sold if the family honor was ever at stake. So now he decided that since the family honor was at stake, he decided that he would sell the Ming statue. Alex took the little emperor off the mantelpiece in his Cadogan Gardens and stared down at its delicate handiwork, at least having the grace to feel a little sad at the loss of the family heirloom. So he had finally decided to get rid of it, to sell it off, and then he took it off the mantelpiece, and for one last time he looked at it, feeling quite sorry that they were going to lose this heirloom. He then drove to Bond Street and delivered the masterpiece to Sotheby's, giving instructions that the emperor should be put up for auction. So that is how the emperor had come to be in the auction room. The head of the Oriental department, a pale, thin man, appeared at the front desk to discuss the masterpiece with Alex, looking not unlike the Ming statue he was holding so lovingly in his hands. "It will take a few days to estimate the true value of the piece," he purred. So, he said that it would take at least a few days, some time, to judge the value of the piece. "But I feel confident on a cursory glance that the statue is as fine an example of Penque as we have ever had under the hammer." So he says, but while I'm looking at it, just taking a very careless quick look, I can see that this is a fine example of Penque's work of art. "That's no problem," replied Alex, "as long as you can let me know what it's worth within 14 days. "Oh, certainly," replied the expert. "I feel sure I could give you a floor price by Friday." "Couldn't be better," said Alex. During that week, he contacted all his creditors, and without exception, they were prepared to wait and learn the appraisal of the expert. So he tried to pacify all the people whom he owed money to, and then they agreed to wait. Alex duly returned to Bond Street on the Friday with a large smile on his face because he was very excited because he knew that he would get a lot of money. He knew that his great-great-grandfather had paid for the piece and felt sure that the statue must be worth more than £10,000, a sum that would not only yield him enough to cover all his debts but leave him a little over to try out his new refined system on the roulette table. So he was definite that the statue would get him at least £10,000 and also leave him with enough, to try his luck once more on the roulette table. As he climbed the steps of the Sotheby's, Alex silently thanked his great-great-grandfather because he was thinking that now he was, going to be freed from the chains of the debt that he was drowning in. He asked the girl on reception if he could speak to the head of the Oriental department. She picked up an internal phone and the expert appeared a few moments later at the front desk with a somber look on his face, with a sad and a serious look. The expert came back. Alex's heart sank as he listened to his words. Immediately, as soon as Alex saw the expert's face, he knew that the expert did not have very good news for him. "A nice little piece, your emperor, but unfortunately a fake. Probably about 250 years old, but only a copy of the original, I'm afraid. Copies were often made because..." "How much is it worth?" interrupted an anxious Alex. £700, 800 at the most. So, Alex, he realizes at that moment that, when he's told by the expert that it's just a fake, it is not the original piece of art, his heart sinks. So he says, "Enough to buy a gun and some bullets," thought Alex sardonically, mockingly, as he turned and started to walk away. "I wonder, sir," continued the expert. Yes, sell the bloody thing," said Alex without bothering to look back, because now he knew that he wouldn't be getting the 10,000 that he was dreaming of. "And what do you want me to do with the base?" "The base?" repeated Alex, turning round to face the Orientalist. "Yes, the base. It's quite magnificent. 15th century, undoubtedly a work of genius. I can't imagine how..." "Lot number 103, announced the auctioneer. "What am I bid for this magnificent example of..." The expert turned out to be right in his assessment. "At the auction at Sotheby's that Thursday morning, I obtained the little emperor for 720 guineas. And the base? That was acquired by an American gentleman of not unknown parentage for 22,000 guineas. So, now what is a guinea? A guinea is a gold coin which is originally worth 20 shillings. Okay. So, from this story, we come to know eventually that it was not the Chinese statue, the Ming emperor, which was, the original piece, or which was expensive, or which could, bring a fortune. It turned out that the base which the craftsman Yung Li had just fixed very casually turned out to be more expensive and of greater value. So with that, we come to the end of the chapter. But I would want you, boys and girls, to stay tuned because we still have a number of points that we have to discuss. Like, for example, the characters, the theme, and the title of the story. So, until then, bye-bye.